Daphne, you have a vision with Coursera which is quite amazing. You are making the planet smarter. And
That's our hope.
Today we're going to be talking about the education for entrepreneurs. And you told me backstage that you have a story which you would like to share about how Coursera is influencing the world in entrepreneurship.
One of my favorite parts about Coursera is the learner stories, the impact that we've had about the lives of individual people. And among those, one of my favorite stories is that of Kehinde Adewusi from Nigeria. Kehinde was actually one of the lucky ones in that he had finished college and had a good job. He was an engineer at IBM in Lagos. And as such, he didn't need to do anything different, but he felt like he had more potential in him. He started taking courses on Coursera, courses in entrepreneurship and technology, and realized that he really could do more. And he did this incredibly brave thing, which is he quit his cushy job in Lagos and decided to start his own business. And the amazing thing is that it worked. He now runs a business that provides employment for 12 people in Lagos, Nigeria. And the other part of the story is that Kehinde told us that in addition to providing him with his start in entrepreneurship, Coursera is the only way that he's able to train enough qualified people from a university system that is very uneven in Nigeria to provide him with the kind of qualified workers that he needs in order to run his business. So he actually requires every one of his own employees to constantly be taking online courses so that they are able to do the work at the level that he wants them to be. And so this is just one of many such stories. We have stories like that from Bangladesh and from Egypt and all over the world. And I'm very proud of being able to provide opportunities for entrepreneurs all over the world to start new businesses and economic opportunity for people around them.
Let's do that. Coursera is something which I'm using personally myself, and there are so many courses there I can choose from, and I can learn at my own pace. But let's go to the beginning, how this whole thing started. You were teaching at Stanford for 18 years?
That's right.
And then what made you decide one day to do something else?
So I'd always had a passion for education. It was never the core of my research, which had always been in machine learning, but it was kind of a side interest of mine. And as part of that, I started to develop some ideas, technologies on how to make teaching better, both on campus, but also to reach out to a broader community. And that created a fair bit of buzz and excitement around Stanford. There was a lot of support from Stanford administration. President Hennessy gave us some seed funding to pilot some of the ideas. And there was enough excitement around that in the fall of 2011, we just put 3 courses out there to see what happens. These were the AI course, the machine learning course, and the database course. And we were shocked at how, without hardly any publicity, all of a sudden each of those courses within a few weeks had 100,000 people registered in it. It's like, okay, that's 100,000 people. That's like, Stanford has 5,000 students in it. So how do you walk away from an opportunity of that magnitude to affect this much change in the world? And so my co-founder, Andrew Ng, and myself decided that we couldn't just go back to the lab and write some more papers. We needed to do something with this. And so we put that on hold, and we took a leave of absence from Stanford. And in January of 2012, started Coursera. And I think we did not expect the growth in either the number of learners or the uptake among top universities and being willing to adopt a model that in some ways was entirely counter to how they had viewed themselves, which is always a very small elite group of students for many of those universities. And people who are highly privileged to have an opportunity to attend a place like Stanford or Yale or Princeton. And we were able to convince them to think about a much larger group of learners of, up to 23 million people around the world today.
There's a lot of learners. How does it feel to be a professor and having 100,000 students in a classroom?
It's really freaky, and it's not just the number, it's the diversity. I mean, in these classrooms, you have people who are as young as 13 and as old as 85. They come from all different countries. They speak a whole host of different languages, and the range of perspectives that you get by interacting with, someone in Bangladesh who's taking your course and has a completely different perspective than someone in Switzerland or someone in California. And you just learn so much from hearing them interact with each other and interacting with you.
Quick show of hands, how many of you have used Coursera to date?
Yay!
Look at that. Wow. Well done. So it's widely used. Now, learning is something which we don't learn at school only anymore.
No.
We just learn lifelong.
Absolutely.
And you are a big fan, and you're very passionate about machine learning and AI. How do you think this will change the way we learn?
Well, I think one of the unique things that we can do at a place like Coursera is we have data from tens of millions, literally tens of millions of learners. So unlike in your typical classroom where you might have data from 20 or even 200 people, and you get that data once a year when you teach your course, it's very difficult to get the kind of insight on what makes teaching effective. And it's very hard to adapt and quickly iterate in the same way that any of you have ever designed a website. You know that you push stuff out every week and you see what happens, and you do A/B testing and you collect the numbers and you make things better and better and better. You can't do that in teaching when you teach 200 students once a year. But now that we have these courses and they run all the time and there's thousands of people in each one of those sessions, all of a sudden we have the kind of data to know what's going to be more effective, this assignment or that assignment. And if we give you this feedback, is it more encouraging than if we give you that feedback? And maybe what's encouraging for you is different than what's encouraging for you. And so you can suddenly collect the data and apply the best data science and machine learning techniques to really provide a personalized learning experience that really targets individual learners and their needs. And I think that's going to be so much more powerful than the kind of one-size-fits-all education that you get when you stick 200 people in a big auditorium and just talk at them for an hour.
So do you mean like totally custom designed courses to each individual?
I think total custom design is challenging from the logistical perspective, and it requires a lot of work on the teacher's side. Mm-hmm. But think of it as individualized paths through a curriculum, so that when you get stuck, I can figure out what makes you stuck and which piece of content that you may not have fully understood and send you back there, maybe give you some additional practice assignments. That might be something that the instructor designed, but one of the things that we've been able to do really well with Coursera is leverage the passion and skills of people just like you, who often contribute assignments and answers and answer questions in the forums. And so you could imagine crowdsourcing a broader range of content that really does provide much more of an individualized experience in a way that a single instructor can never do.
This is true. One of the things I like about Coursera is the way you monetize. Mm-hmm. It's not intrusive. It doesn't force me to pay right away. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning, you mentioned somewhere you had this list of 12 ideas. And you didn't know which ones will work.
That's
how
right.
did you test it? And how did you arrive at the destination?
Well, so I think what Marian is referring to is that in our original university agreement, there was no real discussion of monetization or revenue. There was an appendix. And in the appendix, there was a list of, here's 12 ways where maybe eventually we might make money. And some of these are quite silly when I look back on them. And I'm sure many of these entrepreneurs have faced the same questions. We tried a few of these, and some of these worked much better. Some of these just didn't work at all. And I'm glad to say that we experimented with certificates at a relatively early stage, and we saw that there was serious traction. I mean, people really liked the ability to get a certificate that says, Stanford or Duke or Yale, and we commensurately saw that employers were taking that quite seriously. That is, if you complete, a 3-course sequence from Stanford, that's something that says something about you, not only in terms of your ability to deal with the kind of rigorous high-end content that these universities provide, but also something about motivation and grit and perseverance. And we know that that's something that employers are looking for. So we saw there was a good product market fit there.
So you basically solved the biggest dilemma in education, which is, should it be free or paid? And your answer is, it should be free for everybody, but those ones who want to get a certificate, they're going to pay for it.
That's exactly right.
I think it's very fair to people, because some people are born in different circumstances and they still have the right to, or they have the option to learn without a certificate.
Well, I will also say that Coursera, from day one, from the day that we started monetizing, also has a financial aid option. That is, if you are one of those people like Kehinde in Nigeria, who really can benefit from a certificate, but you can't afford the $50 or $70 that it costs, we will still let you get that. And I think that's part of our social mission.
That's really great. Now, when it comes to education in entrepreneurship, it's really hard to tackle the problem because it's very wide. In your mind, what do you think is the best way to teach entrepreneurship? Or can you teach it?
Well, I think entrepreneurship, just like everything, is a set of skills, and some of them involve innovation and some involve leadership, and depending on which area of entrepreneurship, some of them involve technical skills. I'm sure that those of you who have run technical companies, you or a co-founder usually has technical skills. And so I think that there's a lot involved in entrepreneurship that you can teach, but ultimately there's still that, intrinsic drive and motivation and the grit to keep going when things get really hard, which inevitably will happen at some point. And that's something that has to come from within.
Do you find that the best teachers of entrepreneurship are not the ones who build big companies, but because tennis players still have the coaches who are better than them, because they're better at coaching them, not at building companies. So who do you think is the best person to kind of provide a course for Coursera about entrepreneurship?
Again, I think entrepreneurship is very broad, and there's core skills in entrepreneurship that are core management skills, and that kind of skill can come from a lot of different sources. And similarly, things like design and innovation. There's people in big companies who are entrepreneurs who have been very innovative, and in some ways it might be harder to affect change within the umbrella of a large organization where it's kind of like the ship is going in one direction. You really have to push hard to move it in a different direction. So I think it really depends, but ultimately, as I said, what makes an entrepreneur is that internal drive and grit that is, I think, something that you just really can't teach. You can encourage people, you can motivate them, but ultimately it has to come from themselves.
I'm glad you're mentioning entrepreneurship and corporates, because this is an area where this affects them a lot, because these guys have done the things they did for their own way, and they need to change, and they feel they need to change. How does Coursera tackle this problem of corporate education, and how much is this of a priority for you at Coursera?
So I'm glad you asked that, because this has actually been a growing direction for us in the last 6 months or so, where we started working with companies to help them provide education for their internal employees. And one of the things that, if you look at the problem of the skills gap around the world, a lot of that is a systemic problem in that because of the way the world has gone, people used to go work at a company, and they used to work there for 30 years. And so it was a worthwhile investment for the company to really put a lot of money into educating workforce. Now people often move on after 3 or 4 years, and so employers are saying, well, I'm not going to invest $20,000 to train someone who might be gone in 3 years. And so we see a problem where there's skilled jobs that don't have people with the right skills to fill them, because employers are not willing to make that investment. The nice thing that we could do with Coursera is, because it's such an affordable yet high quality opportunity for employers, they are willing to make that investment of paying, a few $100s for their employees to learn new programming skills or leadership skills or data science. And as such, it provides a way for us to help close the skills gap.
This is true, but if an employer tells me to go and learn something, I might not want to do that. Isn't there a gap in terms of motivation?
Well, I think motivation is probably one of the single biggest problems in education. And we were talking earlier about, we're all motivated in the beginning of the year to go sign up at the gym, but then, 6 weeks later, that gym membership gathers dust. And so how do you create motivation? I think that's something that we're working with employers on how to instill motivation as part of the education process. One of the things that we've found to be very powerful is actually getting small communities of learners to learn together. That creates something that kind of like when you go to the gym with a friend, you're much more likely to continue. If you learn with a friend or a group of friends, there's a certain peer pressure on how not to let the team down. And I think we found that to be a huge factor in increasing motivation and retention.
This is true, but how does it affect the complexity of your product? When you're on a mobile, the screen is limited. How do you make the product advance, yet make it simple so people don't get confused when they're using it?
Well, the problem with education is that it is a very complex product. And I think we've made considerable headway in, for instance, doing something on the scale of a mobile device. But, ultimately, if you look, for instance, at our programming courses, most of the people do those on the web. They don't do those on a mobile. I mean, imagine writing a complicated program on a screen that large. People just don't do that. But in terms of, for instance, being able to consume little bits of content while they're on the subway on the way to work, or even on a plane using offline, and do some of the multiple choice quizzes that are a way for them to kind of stay engaged with the content and remember it, that people do on the mobile device. And so often what we see as being most effective is a hybrid learning experience, where there's chunks of sort of in-depth, intensive work that happen on the web with a keyboard, with a big screen, and little bits and pieces of content that kind of keep you engaged that you do on a mobile device.
Yeah. So right now you are at 23 million learners. And you said you have a long way to go because there are lots of people on the planet. How do you get from 23 million to everybody else?
Well, I think that's a really challenging one. And if you think about, first of all, what is the size of the opportunity, there's probably about 1 billion people in the world who are high school educated and are on a professional trajectory to the point that they can benefit from the kind of more higher ed professional content that we provide. 23 million to 1 billion is a pretty big gap for us to close. So how do you get there is a really good question. Language is one big issue. Most of our content right now is in English. We've made a big effort to recruit universities that teach in languages other than English, and we've made dents in some of the major languages like Spanish and Chinese and Russian and French and Portuguese. But the universities in those countries are often quite cash-strapped, at least in some of them, and don't necessarily have the resources to invest in large online courses. So we invested money in translation of courses, but that has its own set of challenges because you can't really, if you have translated subtitles and you're reading the subtitles and trying to understand complicated content at the same time, it's often challenging for people. So how do you get content that speaks to the diverse needs in language? How do you get content that speaks to the diverse needs in culture and the kind of skills that people need? So really it's a content supply question is one of the biggest issues that we have. Another one is the awareness problem. How do you get people who are in Bangladesh to even know that this content exists for them? How do you get that word of mouth going? So there's a lot of questions that we have to deal with both on the supply side and on the demand side to go from that 23 million to 1 billion.
How do you see big platforms like the simplest is LinkedIn because this is more professional and they want to learn. We have Twitter, we have Facebook. How do you see these platforms as a vehicle to get you to those people who need to get educated?
So I think that many of the platforms that you describe have a very different model of engagement. It doesn't require the kind of, in-depth concentration, to put something on your Facebook feed. That's kind of like a fun, lightweight 3-minute activity. You don't need to sit there and, do a homework assignment for 2 hours. So they have in some ways an easier engagement problem than we do. Getting people to work hard is a challenge, even when it's good for them.
And you don't think of using partnerships or any kind of programs together with platforms like LinkedIn in the future?
No, I think that there are many ways in which one can partner with organizations that have a broad reach to increase awareness. But ultimately, I think it's not just a matter of getting people to hear the word Coursera. I mean, you really need to provide them with the right level of motivation to invest the hard work that's required. Just getting them to log in and look at the courses is nice, but it's getting people to actually engage that I think is a challenge. So I think that one of the analogies that I like to use is that currently online education is at a stage that's similar to the early days of movies. So if you've ever looked at the earliest movies, these were a camera that was set on a stage very much like this, where there were actors doing theater. And when you look at what that experience looked like, other than the fact that it was accessible and affordable, it was actually a pretty crappy experience, because theater acting is very different from movie acting. You have to overact for the people in the back row to even see your facial expressions. Yeah. So it looked horrible. But over time, people learned to act to the medium, and then they learned to exploit the medium, which is how we have, the X-Men and Pixar and, and Star Wars, which you would never have envisioned in the early days of movies. I think when you think about education, the first online education offerings were the camera in the back of the classroom. Horribly unengaging content. Yeah. But then we learned how to teach to the medium, shorter units of content, much more to the point, more interaction within the content. I think we're only at the start. So we are at we're at the stage 1.0, if you will, of online education.
I totally agree. And today when I open my Coursera app on my iPhone, I see it's a mix of text and video. Mm-hmm. How does this evolve over the next coming years?
Well, I think that over the coming years, we're going to, first of all, machine learning is going to make it much easier to navigate through the content via different trajectories. Mm-hmm. But I also think that over time, the notion of instructional design will become much more integrated into how people teach, mm-hmm. And it'll be a lot easier to design more interactive, engaging type of activities like demos and games and things like that, which are now possible, but it's a lot of work. And so if people start teaching like that in the normal course of events, that will make education so much more appealing. It'll be much easier for people to kind of want to spend a long time in the course, much as they spend a long time watching TV or playing computer games.
This is true. A good friend of mine, he's this guy who has a company called Good AI. And we discussed in one of the think tanks education. And another guy asked him about education, and he says, well, you know what, in my mind, it's a temporary problem. Mm-hmm. Because AI, as Elon Musk says, we're going to be cyborgs at some point. So, and this seems like a half serious question, but what's the point of learning? In 30 years from now, we're going to be downloading the knowledge anyway. What do you think about that?
I think it's going to be a long time before we're actually downloading skills into our brain. I think already in some ways you can say that we are downloading facts into our brain. True. In a way that, 30 years ago, there was no Google. And so all of the facts that you needed to either remember, you needed to go and laboriously look them up in an encyclopedia or something. We don't need to know a lot of facts anymore because they're all there at the tip of our fingertips on the mobile device. But we do need the skills. The skills are not the thing you can download.
So what you're saying, we still need to learn the skills?
Yes.
And we just get the facts in the best way we can get them.
I think facts are becoming much more of a commodity, and you don't need, some facts you need to remember. You don't want to look up what the capital of the United States is every time that the question comes up. But I think a lot of investment in memorizing facts is now much less important than investing that same time in learning how to be really good at the kinds of higher end skills that you can't just get from looking it up on Google.
That's a fair point. Now, you being very passionate about AI, are you afraid of what's going to come in the next 20, 30 years?
Let's see. I don't think that AI is going to take over the world in the next 20 or 30 years, that we're going to be building machines that are smarter than us. Currently, if you look at AI applications, they are very, very good in a very narrowly focused area, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. The problem of general intelligence, I think, is still fairly far away. Where I think AI is going to make a very big difference is in taking over jobs that are currently fairly high-paying, white-collar jobs, and we're going to need to shift the economy in much the same way that the Industrial Revolution shifted the economy. And that is a challenge for us as a society, how to provide meaningful employment to all those people.
So you still think we are going to be safe?
I think we're safe from being taken over by robots, yes.
That's great to know. Ladies and gentlemen, Daphne Koller.